Next, let's take a look at Vue in action by building a simple web page to show all users' information. So in this example, you will see a couple of key concepts of Vue. It's okay you don't understand them now. We'll of course go over each concept in more detail later on. Now I'm in VS Code. Here's my plan. First, I will implement this simple web page to show all users' information in native JS. And then let's refactor it into Vue. So the rationale behind this is I really want to show you how easy and happy to use Vue instead of using native JS. So without further ado, let's first do this in native JS. You will see it is very tedious to implement such a small web page. So here's the web page. Let's take a look at the body here. In the body, I'm using div class equal to container. This is from Bootstrap. There are two parts in this div. One is a card and one is a table. So there's nothing interesting in the card. I simply just write user management. So let's close this. And then let me expand table. Here is an empty table. In the header, there's only one row and 5 columns. So we're going to show users index, name is active, here true or false, salary, and company. So the t-body here is empty because what we want to do is we're going to use JavaScript to populate this. Basically is inserting, in this case, 7 users, 7 rows into t-body. All right. And the ID of t-body here is user table body. We're going to use this in script. Now in script, there are two parts. First, I declared a variable user list to hold the 7 users, and it initially is empty. And this is window.onload. So this function gets called after the window has been loaded. So the first step in this function is we're going to assign the 7 users into user list. So we declare it here, and we're going to assign it here. I have already hard-coded 7 users here. As you can see, each user has a lot of attributes, but we're not going to show all the attributes in the table. Only going to show 5 of them, like index is active, salary, name, company. All right, so it's an array of 7 users. Okay, so let me close this. Now in the next step, we're going to get element by ID user table body. So this is a table body. We're going to insert 7 rows in here. So first, we're going to empty it. So make sure nothing in there. Next, we're going to use user list, which is array.forEach. So for each user, we're going to insert a row. Now, the way we do that is we're concatenating the HTML using so tr, td, td. So here is tr, here is tr, and this is the first column, second column, third one. As you can see, third one is a ternary operator. So based on true or false, if it's true, we're going to show this. Otherwise, we're going to show this. So basically, this is the Bootstrap badge. So you will see the effect later on. Now, this is the fourth column and the last column. Okay, so for each user, we're going to append this HTML snippet to the inner HTML of user table body. So as you know, this is a very classical way of using DOM to change the content of HTML. Okay, so we're done here. So let me right click and view in browser. So basically we're going to see a table with 7 users. Okay, so this is the card and this is the table. As you can see, we have the head, table head, and we have 7 users. And here is a Bootstrap badge. So it's inactive when the is active is false. If it's true, we got active. So we have 2 different badges. So everything looks good. But as you can see, it's kind of tedious to use DOM to change something because first you have to get element by ID, and then you have to concatenate those very tedious HTML snippet. Here we have HTML, and here we have JavaScript. We have HTML, we have JavaScript. So you have to constantly break in and break out HTML quotes, so which is kind of tedious. Next, we're going to modify this. Basically, we're going to delete everything, and we're going to use Vue to do it. I created a new file called users_view.html. In here, I'm going to provide the Vue solution to the problem. I copied the native JS code into users.html. So when you review this video, you can compare these 2 files to see there are 2 different approaches. One is using native JS and one is using Vue.js to solve the same problem. That is, show a table of 7 users. How do we use Vue First of all, we need to bring it into our current page, or we need to import it. It's very simple to import it. I've already copied the CDN of Vue.js. So here we're in head, right after bootstrap.min.css, we can paste it here. That's all. That's all you need. All you need is this script link. Now, before we go to script and write something there, one last thing I want to do is I'm going to give an ID to the root div under body here. Okay, so this is the div. So here I'm going to give this guy an ID. The ID can be anything here. Of course, I'm using app, but you can use application or app1, doesn't matter. Now, if you still remember, the structure is under body, there's only one div, and under this div, there are two more divs. So one div is the card, and one div is the table. Okay, but I'm giving this ID to the root div, the only div under body. All right, next we're going to create an instance of Vue. So create an instance of Vue. So here's the syntax: const app assignment operator Vue. After this, we're going to set some settings here. So first, element app. We're plugging in our root element with the ID of app. Do you remember ID equal to app? We assigned an ID to this div. So that means we're letting Vue take over div with ID equal to app. So out of this div, there are two more divs. They are all under control of Vue. Now Vue is taking over basically everything under body because there's only one div, right? So this is a must. Next, we're going to define our data. So if we go back to users.html, remember the first thing we do when we go to the script is we declare a variable user list to use it to store the data. And how can I do this in Vue? It's very simple. So after EL, by the way, EL stands for element, we're going to define data. Now here you can define as many variables as you can, but in this case, we'll only define one, which is user list. This data here is a JS object. Here we have key value pairs. That's why we're using colon. So key value, key value. So the value here is empty initially. This is an empty array. And I'm going to put some comments here. Used to store users, all the users. Now let's go back to users.html. The second thing we do in native.js is after the window has been loaded, we're going to assign those 7 users to user list. How can I do that in Vue? So first, I'm going to copy this. So make sure you don't mess up the braces and go back here. So when the Vue instance is being created, now this function will be called. So there's a very special function in Vue, it's called created. So this is the built-in method. Okay, and in here, oh, by the way, I forgot to add a comma. All right, so here I'm going to assign it to this dot user list. By the way, this dot user list refers to the user list you defined in this data.js object. Okay, so I already copied the 7 users. I'm going to paste. I know there are many braces, curly brace, brackets, don't mess them up. Okay, all right, so I'm going to collapse it so you can see it clearly. So we set up everything. We gave the div with app to Vue, so Vue can take it over. And then we defined user list. And when Vue instance is being created, we assign 7 users to this dot user list. So we have the data. How do we render it? In other words, how do we populate the table here? To be more specific, is table body or T body. And we no longer need DOM. We no longer need to concatenate HTML snippets. And we don't even need this ID. So I'm going to delete this ID here. Okay, so let me show you how to do it. Yeah, if you remember that for each user in user list, we're going to insert a TR with 5 TDs because each TD represents a column, right? Okay, here's the syntax. TR. Okay, and in this TR, I'm going to use a Vue directive called v-4. user in user list. Okay, for each user in user list, it looks like a for each loop, right? We're going to create 5 TD. Okay, so here's the first TD, and then I'm going to do copy, paste, 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 paste. All right, what do we want in the first TD? We want user dot index. Okay, if you forget the structure, we're going to take a look at the users.html. So each user has index, is active, salary, name, company, right? Okay. Here is user.index, but this is not enough. You have to use curly braces. Okay, you have to enclose it into curly braces, and we call this the mustache notation. All right. So next is the same thing here. We're going to have user.name. All right, so that's it. Let's render it. Right-click, View in browser. Okay, we already have everything here. Okay, so this is the T head, and then we have T body with all the data. So simple. You do not have to get element.id and use inner HTML. All you need to do is to use those mustache notation and use a v4. There is a little problem here is in this Vue version, we're printing user.isActive directly on the page. So if you look at here, in this isActive, we have false, false, true, false, true, false, false. So which is not very user-friendly. We're going to use badge. Here is the badges from Bootstrap. So if I click here, you can see all different kinds of badges here, right? Very nice badges here. So here is success and here is danger. So what we want to do is if isActive is false, we're going to use this red danger badge. Otherwise, we're going to use this green success badge. So basically, it's this 2. So I'm going to copy this 2 and go to VS Code. What should I do? Apparently, we cannot just print user.isActive. And of course, we cannot just put these 2 things here, because in this case, both edges will be printed. So what we're going to do is, if this is true, we print active. If it's false, we're going to print inactive. How do we do if else in Vue? So here is the syntax. Okay, so let me cut this. And we can use another Vue directive called vif. This time we no longer need the mustache. Okay, so if this is true, show this span. Okay, the else, show this inactive. Okay, that's all you need to do. Even though we define 2 spans here, but remember, only one of them will be visible. Okay, let's come back to Chrome, and we're going to refresh. Now we have those nice inactive and active badges. Our next task is that we're going to add one more line here to show how many users are there in the database. Right now, there are 7. Okay, it's obvious there are 7, but what if we have many pages? Now, each page has 10 or something. It's kind of useful to have a total number of users here. And how can I do that in Vue? So let's go back to VS Code. We should put one line in part. So let me expand it. Right under H5, I'm going to write a P, and I'll give it a class. And this is the class from Bootstrap, called text. So in here, we're going to write total number of users. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write something called like this. Total users. Okay. Then I'm going to define this total users in script. So copy and scroll down. Now this time I'm going to show another feature. It's called computed property. So after created, make sure you add a comma. And we're going to write something called computed. Now you can have as many computed properties as you want, but now I'm only defining one. It's called total users. So it's a function. it returns this dot user list dot length. So because this length is really how many users we have in this user array. Okay, so let's go back to Chrome, and when I refresh, it's there. Okay, so let me show you something interesting. If I press F12, okay, and also I'm going to see how many users are there in the list. What I can do is use app. Do you remember app? So app is the ID that we gave to the root div. App dot user list. As you can see in the user list, we have 7 users. Okay. Now I'm going to show you the salary of the first user. So 0 dot salary, and it's the same as this salary. So this is a very good tool for you to debug. Okay. Let me show you a fantastic feature of Vue, which is also the magic part of Vue. So in this example, we have 7 users, and the isActive of the first user is false. That's why we see this inactive badge. So what if I change this from false to true? So what happened on the page? We never defined it, right? We never defined what happened if it goes from false to true in JavaScript code in our HTML file, right? So here's how I can change the value on the fly. So I'm going to use app.userList. By the way, this user list here refers to the user list we defined in this data object. Okay, so if I change this to user list 1, then we're going to have app.userList1. All right, I'm going to get the very first user and access its is active, and I'm going to change it to true. So now it is false, right? That's why we have this inactive. But after I press enter, the value becomes true. Please take a look at this view here. So if I press enter, the magic happened, right? It automatically becomes active. But we as developers, we never did that. All we did is define the data and render it. But the magic part of Vue starts when values in data object changes. In this case, I changed the value of isActive, right, from false to true. Immediately, Vue re-rendered the page to show the change on the web page. This is because Vue is reactive. It means that when our data changes, Vue will automatically detect this change and updates the value on the page accordingly. So what happened in Vue is each component keeps track of its reactive dependencies during its render. So the system, the Vue system, knows precisely when to re-render and which components to re-render. In this case, we only have one component, which is the entire Vue. Here is another example of Vue's reactivity. So for example, right now we have 7 users. That's why this computed property shows 7. Okay. What if we delete one? What if we delete the last one from the user list? And we can do this directly from console. So first, we're going to access this user list by using app.userList. And then we're going to invoke a method called pop. If I press enter, the very last user will be popped. In other words, will be deleted. Please take a look at this table and this number. Since Vue is reactive, if I make this change in data, the Vue will change automatically, and we don't have to worry about it. So if I press enter, we have one less user, and this number becomes 6. We didn't do anything about this in coding. Okay, Vue will do this automatically. That's why we love it, because Vue is reactive. In this example, we hard-coded 7 users in users_vue.html. So this is not very practical, because in practice, what we do is the front end will make an AJAX request to the backend. So the backend server will retrieve the 7 users from database and respond to us. So I'm going to modify this to make it look real. What I do here is in created, we're going to delete everything in between the open and close curly braces. So now it's empty. And instead, we're going to use axios or fetch to make requests to the backend. All right, so how do we make requests to the backend? We're going to do that in a function or in a method. In Vue, there is a way we can define functions or methods in this Vue instance. Right after computed, make sure you do not mess up the curly braces. So here's open, here's close. We have a comma, and then I'm going to define an attribute called methods. And methods is also an object. So you can define as many methods as you can, but in this case, we're only going to define one. It's called get user list function. So this is the name, and this is the value. The value is the entire function. In here, let me make sure I have some comments here. We're making AJAX request to remote server for users. Okay. Do you still remember how to make requests? We're using axios.get. In this case, I'm going to request a server, and the server's name is HTTPS So this get method will return the 7 users as JS object, and we're going to save it in user list. Okay, so here's how we do it. We're using const, and we're using destructuring. We're only interested in data in the response, right? And we're going to rename data to response. I know this sounds weird, right? And then remember, we're going to add await in front. Now, since we add await to this asynchronous call, we need to add async in front of the function. Okay. Once we get data and rename it to res, we can assign res to this dot user list. Okay. All right. Then what we do is when the Vue instance gets created, we're going to call this get user list. Okay, in created method. Okay, this dot get user list. All right. So let me right click and view in browser. This time I didn't hard code the 7 users. So what happened is when the Vue instance gets created, and then we're going to call this method. In this method, we're going to make an asynchronous call to this address, and this address, this server on this address will return 7 users in JSON. And we're going to assign the data part of this return value to this .user list. So after this function gets called, this user list, which was empty initially, will have 7 users in this case. Okay, so right click, let's launch it. Now, as you can see, we didn't see anything. So let me press F12. So it says Axios not defined. Very good. We use Axios, but we forgot to import it in, right? So we're going to copy the CDN of Axios and paste it in the head section of our HTML. I have already copied the CDN. I'm going to scroll up. And under Vue library, we're going to copy and paste. We have 2 libraries. One is Vue and one is Axios. Okay, so let's do it again. I'm going to refresh. Now it has the 7 users. One last thing that I want to show you is the bi-directional data binding. So if you remember that in previous videos, I changed the value in data object. For example, we changed this from false to true, and the Vue will show me the changes immediately. Now, what about the other direction? Now, what if I change something on the page? Will this affect the value in data object? So let's work on this. So now everything is read-only, right? Because I simply just show the value. Now, what if I make this an input box, an editable input box? So here's how we do it. We're going to go to VS Code. Let's find salary here. It's right here. Now, as you can see, I only show the value. I get the value and I render it. What if we want to modify this value? So I'm going to put an input box here. So input. Let's make the type text. Okay. And then let's make the value. If you remember that the value is the value, the placeholder value we put in this box will be this. Okay. All right. To make it more interesting, I'm going to add another directive called v model equal to user dot salary. This v model here, this attribute is crucial because it binds this input box with the salary attribute of the current user. Okay, so once we have done this, let's go here and refresh. Now this salary becomes editable. Now the default value is, of course, the salary of this user. What if I change this one to, let's say, 999.99? Okay, now once I press enter, so the value will be changed, of course. So the value is changed on the view. But what happened in user list? All right, so let's print it out here. So app.userList, and we want the first one, and we're going to print the salary. Look at it here. The salary of the first user is changed to 199.99. In other words, this is really the bi-directional data binding. If we change something in the view or in the presentation layer in here, it will also affect the real data in here. Show you in the data object here. And on the other side, if I change something here, and that change will be updated, will be re-rendered immediately. Okay, but the premises here is you have to add this v model. Okay, so this is the bi-directional binding. Let's do a summary here. How do I use Vue in my web page? Step 1, I'm going to copy and paste this into my page. Okay, so this is the CDN. Step 2, we're going to give an ID to the root div under body. So make sure you have only one div, one direct div under body. But inside this div, you can have as many children div as you want. But just make sure that give this ID to the root div under body. In this case, I name it app, but it can be anything. Step 3, we're going to script. We're going to use this syntax to create an instance of Vue. And here's the syntax. In the constructor, we have to pass this very big JS object. As you can see, here is a curly brace, and here is a closing one. And this entire thing here is a JS object. It is passed to the constructor of this Vue. So what is in this JS object? So there are many properties. Property 1, property 2, 3, so on and so forth. So those are the important ones. You must have EL. You can just use copy and paste because in most Vue programs, you can just simply just copy and paste. Okay, you are given this app, this div with app for Vue to handle. The second important property is data. And you can define as many variables you want in here. Okay, in this case, we only have one. If you're going to define a second one, just have a comma, and you can define in next line. All right. The third one is created. Now, this method gets called when Vue instance is being created. So it makes sense to prepare the page to get some data from server in here. The fourth one is called computed property. So in this case, we use this computed property to show the number of users in user list. The last but not least is called methods. And in here, you can define many methods as you want. And in this case, we only have one, is called getUserList. In here, we make an AJAX call. Okay, so this is something we have learned before. There are other properties. We're going to learn them later on. In HTML, this is a notation to access computed property, in this case, total user. Now in table, we used v4. Here's a v4 to populate the table. So this is how we display the index, name, company, and salary of this user. We also used vif, velse, and also vmodel. So those are called Vue directives. So I hope you now have a basic understanding of Vue.